Luigi Mangione's portion of his grandmother's $30 million will is up in the air after his arrest for murder. The suspected killer's grandmother left her fortune to not only her children, but her grandchildren as well. But that comes with a huge caveat, one that Mangione might not be able to escape from. Mary Mangione, Luigi's grandmother, was the matriarch of 10 children and nearly 40 grandchildren. Her husband, Nick Mangione Sr., built a multi-million-dollar empire, which included businesses like country clubs, radio stations, and nursing homes. The family matriarch passed away last year and left her millions in a trust that could be accessed by her 10 children. One of her 10 children that can access that trust is Louis Mangione, Luigi's father. But problem is, her will specifically stated anyone charged, indicted, convicted of, or pleads guilty to a felony would be cut out. The will reportedly states, quote, "It is my precatory desire that the trustees particularly consider invoking their discretion to implement this section if the felony is a common law felony, a statutory felony, if it is the codification of a common law felony, a heinous felony, any felony involving a physically violent act against another person or property, or any drug-related felony involving distribution or intent to distribute any type of drug or illegal substance. The decision of the trustees is conclusive, final, and binding on anyone. It is my precatory wish that the benefit of the doubt is not given to the individual." Essentially meaning Luigi's portion of the $30 million, which has reportedly been estimated to be worth more, he could see none of that, given he's accused of murder in one state and faces charges in another. In Pennsylvania, where Mangione was arrested, he faces charges including forgery, carrying a firearm without a license, tampering with records or identification, and presenting false ID to law enforcement. Meanwhile, in New York, where United CEO Brian Thompson was gunned down, Mangione faces charges including 1 count of murder, 2 counts of second-degree criminal weapons possession, 1 count of second-degree possession of a forged document, and 1 count of third-degree criminal weapons possession. Despite seemingly being cut out of his grandmother's will, that hasn't stopped Mangione from retaining a high-profile lawyer to help fight his case. Last week, he retained former Manhattan prosecutor Karen Friedman Agnifilo to represent him in his New York case. If that last name sounds familiar, it's because she's the wife of Sean Diddy Combs' defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo. And like Combs' case, Mangione's case continues to dominate the headlines after his arrest last week. He was arrested last Monday at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, about 4 hours west of where he once attended college. It was there the 26-year-old was eating a hash brown, sitting alone at a table with his laptop and backpack, when he was recognized by a customer who alerted an employee who then called police. According to his criminal complaint, officers knew right away they had their guy. But when police asked him for ID, he handed them a New Jersey ID with the name Mark Rosario. And when he was asked if he had been to New York recently, he became tight-lipped and started to shake. He later gave officers his real name, and when he was asked why he used a fake one, according to police, he said, "I clearly shouldn't have." In his backpack, police found several items, including a black 3D pistol with a loaded Glock magazine, a 3D printed silencer, the fake New Jersey ID, which police say was also used to check into a New York hostel, and a handwritten note, which officials say was his manifesto, which reportedly included lines of "I do apologize for any strife and trauma, but it had to be done," as well as "these parasites had it coming." While UnitedHealthcare has stated neither Mangione or his parents received insurance through their company, officials believe Mangione was driven to kill Brian Thompson by his anger towards the health insurance industry. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch also announced more evidence against the suspected shooter. Last Wednesday, she said 3 shell casings recovered at the scene matched the gun found on Mangione when he was arrested. She also said Mangione's fingerprints were recovered from a water bottle and granola bar wrapper found near the crime scene. While it appears Mangione won't have his inheritance to rely on that could help pay for his defense, some of his online supporters have donated more than $100,000 to a defense fund, which at one point was taken down before being restored again. Mangione remains behind bars in Pennsylvania, but soon a judge will weigh on whether or not to issue bail for the Ivy League grad. A hearing for that is set in the coming weeks. So much to break down with this case. I'm joined now by criminal defense attorney Serena Townsend. Serena, thank you so much for joining me today. You know, this case has truly been dominating the headlines, and there's been so many facets of Luigi Mangione that we're still learning. But I want to ask you your thoughts on his inheritance. His grandmother left $30 million, possibly more, to her children and grandchildren, but with a huge stipulation, essentially saying no one can be accused of or convicted of a crime. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she realized the effect that that clause was going to have in, her in the life of her grandchildren. It might have even been like a boilerplate term that was included in this will. It's a very interesting situation. He has been accused. You have to also think of it as, what actually ends up happening with that money if he doesn't get it. It's always a possibility that other people will get that money, other family members, and you never know. They have the discretion, to give him what they've inherited, right? So even if her desires say one thing in the will, if the people who ultimately get that money decide, listen, we believe in him, we want to do with our money what we want to do with it, you never know. He could end up with that money in the end somehow.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, how binding is a document like a will? Do you see any loopholes from what we know of the will that could allow Luigi Mangione to use his inheritance, possibly to contribute to his criminal defense?
It's a really interesting question. That's why we have lawyers, right? When you have a contract, which is essentially similar to what a will is, not exactly, but there are terms in the will, and there's always an opportunity down the road for that will to be contested. And anybody who's named in that will could potentially contest it. The lawyers that they hire can contest it. It could end up in court for a very long period of time where, people are trying to define certain terms or certain intentions of the person who wrote that will. So as much as it seems, black and white, nothing in the law ever is.
And Mangione does come from a pretty wealthy background, or a well-to-do off background for sure. Do you think his parents are paying for his high-profile defense attorneys right now?
That's another very good question. I mean, it's likely that his family, because they have the means to fund a defense, has put up that money. It seems like the family is supportive of him. Based on the evidence that we have so far and the media's reports, it does seem like he grew up in a very big and loving family who are essentially shocked by what's going on, shocked by the allegations, shocked by his apparent, disappearance right before this incident. If everything tracks the way that he's been raised, it feels like his family would at least support him through this defense and pay for, the lawyers that he now has to hire to defend him in this heinous allegation.
And of course, you're a criminal defense attorney. When you look at the evidence authorities have right now, including the fake IDs, the mask, the ghost gun, the 3D printed silencer, what could defending a client like Luigi Mangione really kind of look like in terms of the murder case?
Well, as much as there is evidence that could potentially link him to this crime, the case is a circumstantial crime, a circumstantial case at this point, right? So there's direct evidence that could lead him, down the path to a conviction, and there is circumstantial evidence. In this case, there's not that much direct evidence, meaning there's not a witness who's really out there saying, hey, I saw this happen and he's the guy who did it, right? Whoever committed this crime was wearing a mask covering most of their face and a hoodie. And so it's a circumstantial case. There's a lot of building blocks that the prosecution needs to fit into a puzzle in order to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not a done deal at this point. I think at this rate, he has an opportunity to argue identity, that he was misidentified, that this was not actually him. And then based on the other evidence that comes out, potentially linking him to the case, and what we're hearing, he might go with an insanity defense. So right now it's a little bit up in the air. There's a lot of opportunity for him to poke holes in the prosecution's case and form reasonable doubt. I do not think it's an open and shut case at this moment.
A lot of the stories we cover wouldn't be possible without the help of our amazing sponsors like Odoo. I'm sure a lot of you watching this might be business owners or thinking about starting a side hustle. Well, Odoo can help. Odoo is a free all-in-one business management software with tools to help you run your business. I mean, look, I'm a cat mom and I want my cat buttons to get some brand deals. Using Odoo's website builder, I built a site for my cat buttons in just minutes, thanks to easy tools like AI copywriting and drag and drop features. 5 minutes later, boom, check it out. I have buttonsthecat.com. So I want to thank Odoo for sponsoring our videos, and for our amazing viewers, you can start building your site now and get a free domain for the first year with our link odoo.com/lcnews24. Again, that's odoo.com/lcnews24 to try Odoo now for free. This case has really kind of captivated the nation, from different political sides, but also from people kind of watching how this all continues to play out. As authorities kind of talk about the motive in this case, what do you make of the alleged manifesto Luigi wrote that said lines like these parasites had it coming?
I would like to see a deeper connection with him and that manifest. I think a lot of people, maybe they're conspiracy theorists, maybe not. I think a lot of people are having trouble wanting to know where this manifesto was recovered and how. There's always, the talk of police planting evidence in order to strengthen the case. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but I'd be interested to see how that manifesto was, recovered. Where was it? Was it on him, on his person? Is his handwriting the same? Motive is going to be a big thing here. The prosecution doesn't have to prove motive in order to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. But we all know that a jury is going to want to hear the why. They're going to want to know why and link up a motive to this shooting. The police might try to link it up to the scrawlings on the bullet shell casings that were also recovered. But right now, without him making a statement and telling us why, all of this is speculation, and the police and the prosecution are going to have to show a very strong link between him and the evidence that's been recovered in order to formulate a motive.
And are you surprised, given kind of what we know now, plus the evidence that we have, plus the scrawlings on the bullets as well, too, why Mangione was only charged with second-degree murder as opposed to first-degree murder, given the alleged amount of planning that kind of went into this?
Sure. Yeah. So first degree murder requires a certain extra, we call a bump up from murder in the second degree. Murder in the second degree, it seems like it's not the highest level because technically it's not, but murder in the second degree fits the allegation here because it only requires you to have intended on killing a person and then actually killed that person. The only way you can be charged with murder in the first degree is if you did all of that and there's an extra thing that you also did or that, delineates a certain person's position. So for example, if you murder a police officer, that bumps up the murder 2 to a murder 1. Or if you murder something while you were committing a different felony, like a burglary or a robbery, that bumps up the murder 2 to a murder 1. So murder 2 is your standard intent to kill murder. Murder 1 would require an additional crime.
And is it possible those charges could be upgraded, in your opinion?
Well, depending on what the evidence shows, of course it could. Now, I don't think Brian Thompson is going to be shown to have been, a law enforcement officer, but there are other things that could bump this up to murder in the first degree. For example, if somebody can prove that he was a hitman, which again, I don't think that the evidence rises to that level, but depending on what the evidence is that they recover, it could fall into one of those categories of murder in the first degree. But again, we have to wait and find out what the evidence actually is that they've recovered and what the theory of the prosecution is before we could think about whether they could actually bump up the charge to a murder in the first degree.
And right now, Mangione's still inside that Pennsylvania state prison right now, but he's reportedly expected to waive extradition. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that is because it's going to be almost impossible, really impossible for him to not get extradited. Extradition or those extradition hearings are very narrowly based. Essentially, the only thing that New York has to do is prove that Luigi Mangione is Luigi Mangione. They have to prove that this is, in fact, the person that they're looking to prosecute. They're not, they don't need in that extradition hearing to prove the case. They don't need to prove that their evidence is really strong. They don't really need to prove much of anything except that Luigi is Luigi. And so to fight that extradition hearing is almost a waste of time, in my opinion. It's an inevitable conclusion that he's going to be extradited to New York. So waiving extradition is not necessarily a surprise to me here.
And because, Mangione's still facing different charges in different states at this time, is the murder case going to take precedent over the Pennsylvania case where, he's just accused of, giving law enforcement a fake ID and forgery and that type of sort?
Yes, I expect that the New York case will take precedence. I think that's also why Pennsylvania is clearly cooperating with New York in this extradition process. They're saying, listen, we're not going to fight New York on extradition. We understand that the whole reason why you're searching for Luigi Mangione in Pennsylvania is to prosecute him for this very, very heinous crime in New York. Everybody basically knows that the New York crime is the precedential crime here, and that's the one that's probably going to move forward first.
And do you see any possibility that Luigi Mangione could get bail in the case?
I don't really think it's going to happen. Usually when a judge sets bail, or it's supposed to be when a judge sets bail, is about whether the person is going to return to court to face their charges. We all see that judges set bail for other reasons when cases are really heinous, or the evidence is really strong, or there's a lot of expectation that there's going to be a conviction. But the true meaning of bail, the true reason that bail is set, or that somebody is held pending their case, is to make sure that they return to court. And in a case like this, where the top count is murder in the second degree, he has every reason to flee. He already has fled the jurisdiction to Pennsylvania, and he clearly has the means, he has the money, he has the support to be able to kind of disappear. The argument from the prosecution is going to be, we cannot rely on Luigi Mangione to return to court in New York. We can't rely on it. We simply have to take the highest possible, which is remand, and not bail. And I think that he's going to get remanded because of that. We know that he could probably make bail if any bail is set, because he comes from a wealthy home. And I think a judge and the prosecution are basically going to have the mindset that we can't take any risk. We can't even set any level of bail. He has to be remanded. I do think that's what's going to happen. I think a defense attorney is going to have to make very convincing, strong arguments as to why he should either have bail or be allowed to be out while this case is pending.
Serena Townsend, excellent insight into this case. Before we sign you off, though, where does this case go from here?
So once he's extradited to New York, he's going to be facing indictment by a grand jury in New York. If the grand jury votes to indict him on all of these felony counts, all of the murder, the weapons charges, then after that, he appears in front of a judge for his arraignment on the indictment. He is going to appear in front of a judge before that indictment anyway, but once he's indicted, he's going to appear again in front of a judge to hear the charges, to be able to enter his plea, I assume, of not guilty. And the prosecution will again have an opportunity to, ask the judge to remand him. Once that proceeding happens, that arraignment happens, now the ball gets rolling, where the prosecution has to turn over discovery and all of the evidence to the defense. And now we can see essentially where we go from there.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll continue to learn more as this case continues to develop. Serena Townsend, again, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Luigi Mangione remains locked up in a Pennsylvania state prison, and he's reportedly expected to waive his extradition back to New York. He has another court hearing on December 23rd and a bail hearing on December 30th. He hasn't entered a plea yet, but his lawyer says he's innocent. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.